Good evening. Welcome to Grace and Gavel, where truth meets compassion. Today we're talking about projection and gaslighting, how confident narratives replace truth. Some of the most dangerous accusations don't start with evidence, they start with discomfort, a feeling that something is wrong, and a need to put that feeling somewhere. That's where projection begins. What projection actually is. Projection isn't just a psychological term, it's a relief mechanism. It happens when a person or system cannot tolerate guilt, cannot face internal conflict, and cannot admit uncertainty. So instead of examining the feeling, they assign it. They assign it to someone who had nothing to do with the situation that they created. Fear becomes suspicion. Shame becomes accusation. Doubt becomes certainty. And once projection takes hold, facts become negotiable. How projection shows up in criminal narratives. In criminal cases, projection often looks like this. A suspect is described as cold because they're regulated. Silence becomes evasive. But that is also a legal constitutional right to have the right to remain silent. Doesn't make someone evasive. However, a lot of law enforcement officers are definitely trying to capitalize on that, because if they can get that person to feel like they're under suspicion, and then they feel the need to justify their actions or to try to explain what happened in the story and then get caught up in contradictions and such, then that's a win-win for the prosecution, right? Because they're getting the full story. They go into the fact that, oh yeah, I was with that person, and they tried to harm me, so I harmed them first, or, some other narrative that they're going to give that then automatically puts them in the crosshairs with law enforcement, right? Consistency becomes rehearsed. So all of these allegations are being thrown at them to potentially threaten them and make them feel like they're under suspicion and that they're not doing things correctly. And as we've talked about before, it is a constitutional right to claim the fifth. Right? That is a constitutional right. It doesn't mean, oh, you look guilty, or oh, you're being evasive, or oh, you're being rehearsed. No, I know my rights, and I know that I have the right to claim the Fifth Amendment and my protection. And I don't wish to say anything to you. I would like to speak to an attorney. That is generally the way to handle something like that. Emotional restraint becomes lack of remorse. Oh, well, you killed this person, and look at you, like here you are all smug and you have no remorse and you don't seem to care for what you did. Again, they're trying to bait you to see if you'll say more, if you'll try to justify your actions and say, yes, I have remorse, but I mean, it happened because, then you get tied to this narrative, right? I mean, officers are trained to do those things. They know those tactics. They know those tactics very well. And they're trying to get people to talk more and more and more and more and more, right? Because it helps them. And I'm not saying, that they're bad people. They're doing their job, right? And we ultimately want people who have committed crimes, especially serious, violent crimes, to be put behind bars, right? Because you can't just walk around harming people just for the sake of it. These are interpretations, not evidence. But when repeated enough by family, media, or investigators, they begin to feel true. And as I've said before, sometimes media uses a lot of sensationalism. There's a lot of clickbait in certain instances where people are trying to get people in there. I just think that's disingenuous. I mean, tell people what they can expect from you, but don't try to make it clickbait. Don't try to make it sensational. Don't try to recreate or make up facts just so you get more viewers. I mean, that's really not cool, right? You need to have, journalists need to continue to go by their code of ethics. And I feel like journalism has kind of taken a little bit of a trust hit because a lot of people feel like they're being bait and switched. A lot of people feel like the narratives that are being passed along aren't the full truth, and people like people who are being honest with them. I know I do. I mean, do people make mistakes? Sure. But to intentionally mislead someone, that is another issue in my mind. If you make a mistake, sure, everybody makes mistakes. I make mistakes, you make mistakes, we all make mistakes at times, right? But to intentionally like mislead someone about a certain thing or a certain person to get clicks or likes or anything like that, just really disingenuous and unfortunate. So not because they are, but because they're familiar. It becomes familiar because you think about it. The first time you hear something, you may be like, I don't think that's right. But if you keep hearing it, there is the whole adage that it starts to seem like it could be true, right? And people are like, well, I've heard that multiple times. I mean, they wouldn't keep saying that if it wasn't true, right? Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't, right? Just depends on the person. So let's talk about gaslighting when the narrative turns inward. Gaslighting is what happens after projection succeeds. It's not just lying, it's undermining someone's ability to trust their own perception. And that is a nasty, dirty trick that has consequences. In legal and family systems, gaslighting sounds like you're remembering it wrong. It didn't happen that way. Here's what actually happened. And generally that involves blaming the person who's asking for clarification or asking why these things happened. How did these things break down? That's not exactly how it occurred. The way you're seeing it is wrong. And then no one else sees it the way that you do. So clearly you're the person that has a problem with what's going on and you don't even have the facts. You're getting it wrong. You don't remember. You were little. You're remembering it incorrectly. It did not occur the way that you said that it did. You were trying to blame me when it was really your fault. You were the person who has the problem with this issue. And there really is nothing to have a problem about because nothing happened. It's fine. We're good. You're overreacting is the next ploy that may try to work. Because ultimately, when you are put on the defense, you are going to try to defend yourself. And that's ultimately what they want you to do. Yeah, I'm not remembering it wrong. I remember XYZ. Well, that's not what happened. Well, no one else sees it that way. Oh, really? Well, but maybe I have a different perspective because I actually witnessed this. I viewed it. It affected me. It didn't affect you. You're overreacting. It was no big deal. Like it was a blurb in your whole life. Like it did not affect you that badly. Why are you the only one with a problem? That's what you should ask yourself. Why are you the only person who has a problem with this? No one else seems to have a problem, but yet somehow you do. Not understanding, I'm not getting the disconnect. Over time, the target stops asking, is this true? And starts asking, what's wrong with me? Why am I remembering it wrong? Why does no one else see it this way? Why do I overreact about this? Why am I the only one with this problem? That shift is devastating, personally and legally, if it's in that context of court. And why this is so dangerous in the justice system. The legal system depends on clarity, consistency, and self-trust. If you can't trust yourself, who can you trust? And I know that many who have been in narcissistic and abusive family systems understand this, right? Because ultimately, the core, especially when you're a child, the core of who you are is built on trusting yourself. It's also built on trusting people around you that are raising you and bringing you up, right? That is where the trust is built. And so when you feel like you're on a shaky foundation, it's really difficult to look at the people around you and want to trust them, let alone trust yourself, because they're telling you that you're doing everything wrong, that your reality is not true, that your reality is somehow like shifted and you're having like false memories or you're creating things that did not occur. And so you kind of go into a tailspin because it's like, but I remember that. I remember that specifically. And depending on how manipulative and how adept the people are that are telling you this, I mean, it could go a lot further, right? It could go into the idea of, maybe you're creating false narratives. Maybe you're, there's something going on with you and you just don't understand and you're trying to persecute your family and, you're trying to ostracize us and you really aren't one of us, and just kind of goes down the whole rabbit hole, which is really like mind-boggling if you think about it. So when projection and gaslighting shape a case, alternative theories are dismissed. Witnesses doubt themselves, and juries confuse confidence with truth. As we've talked about, the court doesn't ask, are you 100% confident that this occurred? No. They ask for proof beyond a reasonable doubt, because there can be a false sense of confidence, right? Sometimes people are lying to you and they're really good liars, and they're able to say what they need to say and convince you that what they're saying is truth. Anyone who has been in a destructive family system knows that. Some of the best liars are the most convincing. They are also the ones who are the last ones to admit fault or take ownership for not being honest. But yet they're the first who point their fingers at you and say, you are lying. Knowing full well that they are the ones that created this false narrative. They're the ones who are pitting everyone against each other and causing dissension and drama and combat potentially, right? Infighting amongst family. Contradictions are reframed as character flaws. This is how narrative certainty replaces investigation. Not through malice, but through repetition. Think about some of the most successful manipulative people that you know. They continue pushing the same story long enough to where it becomes kind of part of your reality, part of your thought. Well, I've heard this like 10 times. It clearly must be true. Like, who's going to keep repeating stuff that isn't really happening? So, the thing is, this all is somewhat related, right? The connections to a lot of the other episodes that we've done. We talk about the perfect victim narrative, right? The victim has to be pious. The victim has to be perfect to be relevant, to be important, to be valued, to be looked at as, looking good. Scapegoating is projection made structural here. False confessions often come after gaslighting breaks your self-trust. And ultimately, interrogation, they do use some sneaky techniques, psychological techniques, right? I remember my ethics professor in college. I was so excited when he passed out the grading scale, because I was like, wow, I could easily get an A in ethics, right? Well, the thing was, I think a 70% was an A. He later told us, like the last day of class, he's like, you guys probably looked at this grading scale and thought, oh, wow, it's going to be, this is going to be so easy to pull an A in this class. And he's like, however, what you didn't know is that I have some logical traps waiting for you all. And so that is why my grading scale is so low. So don't expect for everyone to get an A. It might seem like it would be easy to do, but don't worry, I got you. And he looked like Gene Wilder too, from Willy Wonka. So it was one of those things where it's like, okay, so he's acknowledging that he's doing dirty tricks on us. That's not cool, First year, like college students, and you're going to pull out like the big guns. Come on, that's not fair. Projection decides who to blame. Gaslighting ensures that they can't fight back effectively. That they take your blows and they appreciate them and they internalize them. So let's talk about the legal anchor. The law is designed to resist this. That's why evidence matters more than interpretation. Demeanor is not proof. And certainty without corroboration is suspect. When the law fails, it's often because these protections were bypassed, not because they didn't exist, because they've always existed, right? Proof beyond a reasonable doubt, all of that. So in closing, projection feels convincing because it soothes discomfort. Gaslighting feels persuasive because it silences doubt. They tell you what to believe, right? And you better listen and you better take it in. But neither produces truth. In courtrooms and in families, the most dangerous stories are the ones that feel certain before they're proven. If this episode helped you put language to something you felt but couldn't name, let that be enough for today. Clarity often comes before resolution. Projection assigns feelings. Gaslighting erases trust. Where do you see narratives replacing evidence in cases or in everyday life? Thank you for tuning in to Grace and Gavel, where truth meets compassion. And I appreciate each and every one of you tuning in, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.